I don't know, is this like Lord of the Rings? You
Yeah.
guys are, you made it through the attack of the orcs, and now
Right,
you guys
yeah.
are Frodo and Sam,
Yeah.
and you're heading into the wilderness while the
Right.
rest of the party goes to fight the battle in Helm's Deep.
Helm's Deep, yeah. We're on our way to Mordor. Good luck,
Yeah,
guys.
right.
Now, I'm not sure who Frodo is in this situation. Kaleigh, I'll let you pick. Samwise, maybe.
I think
don't
we
know.
all.
Good afternoon, and welcome to today's episode of the IT Collab podcast. I'm your host, Nathan Taylor, and today I have Bobby and Kaleigh from Axiom back on with us again. We had you guys on a few months ago, and sounds like you guys had an eventful couple of months. Welcome back.
We're a little busy.
Just a little bit. Yeah.
Well, I think we were talking right before the end of the year, and of course, all the changes happened with the new year and CMMC. You guys are deep into that. So tell us what's going on in the last year. What's in the last few months? What's new?
Kaleigh, you want to say it? I always get to say it. You say it.
No, I said it in the last one. I really
Did you?
did.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
I did. Yeah.
Well, yeah, we got level 2 assessed, and we passed our level 2 audit. Yeah, so whoop whoop. Yeah, 110 controls, 320 assessment objectives.
Marked as met. We
Yeah,
found 'em.
all marked as met. It was crazy tough. It was harder than I thought it was going to be, and I thought it was going to be pretty darn hard. So that says something. And yeah, it was such a journey. We started it like 3 years ago. And so this is kind of the culmination of just years of effort and hard dedication and sweat and tears from my whole team. It's not just me. Like, there's so many people that, like, any of them that didn't pull their weight, like, we wouldn't have been able to do it. So
Yeah.
it was
totally.
purely a team effort. And I couldn't be more proud of my team
Yeah.
for doing that. So it's really cool. So it's a weird little bit of a quandary. We passed our audit, but now we're sort of in this, like, it's almost like you've paid for your ticket and now you're waiting to get into the park because like the cyber AB, I'm not joking, you can't make this stuff up. The cyber AB and the DoD are discussing exactly how the certificate and the form look. So they're like sort of arguing about form in a document and like a logo, I think. Once they sort of get that whole thing ironed out, then certificates will start becoming officially issued. And then people can say, here's my certificate. I can forward it to you, and I'm officially level 2 certified. So yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah.
You can't make this stuff up.
That shows the infancy, though, a little bit, which is
Right.
actually, I feel like, in my opinion, kind of cool to be a part of something that early. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I mean, the 32 CFR rule that kind of defined what CMMC was, it went live in December, and everybody thought that audits were going to start happening in December, but the Cyber AB is like, we're not ready, because for those of you that don't know who the Cyber AB is, it's a nonprofit organization that has a $0, I guess, dollar contract with the Department of Defense to manage the organizations that do the
accreditation.
certifications. Yeah, the accreditation process, the certifications, and all those things. So they're in charge of it. That's a very, very high level simplification of it. But the point is they're not the government, the Cyber AB. So they work with the government, but they're not the government.
Yep.
Do you think all the craziness happening in politics is going to affect?
Yeah, I don't think that's going to make much of a difference. I mean, it was originally kind of launched, the CMMC program, right around Trump administration. So, and they had a lot of value in it. And I don't think that's going to change. Obviously there's focus on trying to save money through a lot of the cuts that everybody saw with NIST and other things that just recently hit the news yesterday at the time of this recording. But threat actors are going to threat act. So that isn't going to go away. And, they can try to pretend, but stuff's going to still show up in the adversary's hands until something's done.
Yeah.
So I don't see that changing.
So we still see like we have clients or potential clients that are seeing things in contracts or upcoming contracts that are showing up. So that's not stopping what's happening in contracts at all as well. So
Yeah, that's definitely driving the complexity. I had an interesting call with the customer who was, we always get the call as, hey, I want some GCC high licenses. And it's like, well, okay, so let's talk about that, because I'll tell you GCC high licenses, but what are you doing? And, it's interesting because they're just like right on the edge. I'm like, man, it's such a slippery slope for anybody in this space when they're going to get into that CMMC space. And that's wild.
There's 16 of us. So I guess 17 now.
Yeah.
We're growing. We're hiring. Yeah. Know any really good quality engineers in their project team? Because we're taking off. We need more project people.
Seriously.
But we're anticipating that we might double this year as a company, because of the hyper growth that we're experiencing because of the requirements. I think we're right now the 4th or 5th MSP in the country that are level 2 certified. And I don't think there'll be more than maybe 15 or 20
at the end of the year.
By the end of the year, if that.
Well done. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thanks.
What are the things you learned? What are the things you do differently?
Yeah. I mean, I can talk operationally. I think Kaleigh can also share some of the perspectives that she's learned, because our whole company, our whole organization, everybody from start to finish has learned something through this process. As a CEO, I guess what I learned is it is incredibly difficult from an operational perspective, thinking about how you're going to get your organization certified and then move your whole team through a process of maturity and how they can then work with clients at scale and get them to level 2 as well, and not jeopardize their level 2 once you get them there. And it sounds easy when you say it that way, but it is anything but, because there's just so many things. Like, how do you do change control inside your organization as well as work with your clients? Like, right? That's something an MSP would have to figure out. How are you going to do application allow listing? Something you have to figure out. How are you going to remote into the client and still be compliant with FIPS, right? That's a challenge that any MSP would have to do. How are you going to manage the patching? How are you going to control the configuration management of all the systems and then know if they somehow change? Like, all of these questions, just many, 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 many questions with lots and lots of question marks and not a lot of answers. And there's not a peer group that you can sign up that has any of those answers. That you're going to have to figure that out. At least for the first few years. I think eventually more, like, there's already starting to be some peer groups, like the MSPs for the protection of critical infrastructure. It's not really a peer group. It's a combination of organizations that are looking to try to go on the offensive of pushing for the best interests of MSPs, making sure that, like, for example, that we can inherit our level 2 to our clients. What does that look like? They're going to basically be lobbying the government for positive change that's sensical
for MSPs that are
right.
going for a CMMC Level 2 certification to be able to service their clients specifically, not necessarily just MSPs. Yeah.
But MSP CyberX, Brian Hubbard, that's a nonprofit that he runs, and that's just like a peer group of people where we can kind of collaborate. Like, those are starting to appear, but it wasn't that way when we first started.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like the perspective for me, like on my side, if you're thinking about sales and marketing as an MSP, just a normal managed service provider versus doing sales and marketing for the DIB space or, just government contractors, I would say just be really, really careful what you're saying online, what you're saying in articles, what you're saying in videos, because all of a sudden you're getting a lot more picked apart than you did previously.
Yeah.
With the words that you say, with how you're saying it, the correct wording, So I definitely have learned, through this, I know about CMMC. I'm not going to say I'm a professional in any way, but I definitely learned a lot in 3 years, and I can hold my conversation. And I think that it's important, if you are marketing or specifically to selling your clients on MSPs in the CMMC space, you need to know what you're talking about because it's really dangerous to just send a marketing person out there to write an article and they don't know anything about the 32 CFR. rule and how to fact check or anything. Yeah, definitely that part too.
Yeah.
Well, I think also one of the things that Kaleigh did is how do you try to communicate to someone that knows they have a requirement, may not necessarily believe in that requirement? How do you get across to them what they need to do besides just saying yes to you, right? People aren't going to say yes to what you're trying to sell them on. Not that sounds sort of bad, but like they're not going to say yes if they don't understand what you're talking about. So you've got to try to help educate them and get them across the finish line of understanding what they're signing up for.
Yeah.
And we don't always take every possible client that comes our way. There's times where we tell clients like, look, we're just not going to be a good fit for you because they haven't come to the true acceptance of what's required for CMMC. They're like, I just need to get it done. Maybe we can just pass and then we can kind of go back the way we operate. No, it doesn't work that way. We can't do that. It's like we've got to first talk with leadership and those people and try to have a general understanding of, do you understand what you're undertaking? And they're like, well, I think this is dumb. I don't want to do this. We're going kicking and screaming. We might not be the best fit for you. But if it's like, look, we're 80 to 90% of our business is this. We need to be able to focus on doing this service. We understand this isn't going to be cheap and it's going to take time. How can you help us get there, Bobby? What do we need to do? Okay, now we're talking.
You don't have just you can't just put me on GCC high Microsoft licenses and put a better security product in and I'm done.
Yeah, well, Nathan, you've been in this industry for so long. You understand how critical risk is, right?
Yeah.
And there's more risk than just to the client. There's risk to both parties involved. The MSP that's connected with this company, and they're saying, hey, this is how much it's going to cost. You're going to start taking them directions. Like, you both have to be on the same page, because if it isn't that way, then what can happen is you're dragging someone along the way and it's costing them money, and then they're resenting you for that fact. And you're like, I don't have any control over how all of this is like meant to be done. Like, I have to follow these things. And what can happen is if you start having this separation between those, it can get really bad, So you want to make sure that you're both have the right attitudes, that you're both going to be able to move down this path efficiently before you want to start going down it, because it's going to be challenging, and you got to make sure that you're at least on equal footing as you go. And if not, it's not going to go well.
Yeah, makes sense. So was it like a movie scene where there's a metal desk and a bright light and you had to come in with a binder and the auditor would make eye contact with you, and
he was wearing a mask the whole time so you couldn't see it.
Well, so let's talk a little bit about that. So,
good auditor and a bad auditor, and it's like
right, and a good cop, bad cop. Yeah, there was a little bit of good cop, bad cop occasionally in our audit. There was a few times where I was like, are these guys on crack a little bit? Like, what is going on here? But it's because I haven't seen an auditor not kind of get really obsessed about something that you might not particularly feel is very significant, because everybody has their own opinions about stuff. Mm-hmm. An example of that was the POAM, the plan of action and milestone we had. We weren't as religious at filling out the POAM process as we evolved our company, because we moved so fast with our ramp up process. We had it in there, but it was not as detailed as it could have been. And they really got wrapped around the axle on that. And like we spent like 45 minutes to an hour talking about that one. And I'm like, well, this is what we have. You're looking at our system. It's very compliant. We did go through the plans. We did implement those things. Could we have documented it better? Sure. But look at our system. Our system is really good. Like, can we focus on that maybe? So, but, we took notes about that, and we're like, okay, as we're moving our clients through it, we have to make more of a conscious decision of making more note information in there and showing that trajectory. And it's just, everybody, is coming from different perspectives. We're coming from our own perspective. It's funny, like, we would spend weeks sometimes focusing on getting something perfectly refined, so that when we go to talk to the auditor, that they're gonna be like, okay, this is good, but they're really gonna hammer on this. We know they are, and they're like, okay, let me see. Oh, I saw the evidence you presented to us. We're good, and they move on. And it was like, Like they never even talked about it, but then something you're like, they're never going to mention it and they'll just hammer you on it about something.
Yeah.
So you just don't really know where they're going to zero in, but they'll catch you on stuff that you just aren't expecting because it's like their superpower. It's really interesting. Now we're gonna be at GeekCon.
MSP GeekCon.
Yeah, we're gonna be at MSP GeekCon, and I submitted a course. I don't know if it's gonna get approved. I haven't been told yes or no, and maybe when people watch it, by that time it has already been, or yes or no. But the course that I submitted, Nathan, was we're gonna do a mock assessment, so people actually would get to see it, and we would kind of go through the controls, and we call it the assessment tango. We're going to walk them through a bit of that tango so they can see live what it looks like.
Yeah.
It's very fascinating. It's very, very fascinating. It's pretty. You've seen those, Kaleigh. Like, what's your thoughts as someone that isn't typically going to have to go through it?
Mm-hmm.
What's your thoughts about it?
Well, I described it in one of our podcasts as like, I was in theater as a kid. Please don't judge me. I was in theater, as a kid, and memorizing like a script, for theater is really important. And then also like not only being able to memorize it, but that the dialogue between person to person is natural and flowing. You don't want there to be like weird pauses where there shouldn't be and whatnot. And so I think it's really cool because, there's a mixture of having the right amount of documentation and the right amount of like speaking or dialogue from the person of knowing what they're talking about. You can show it on a piece of paper and then you can also speak about it. But you want to be careful that you don't fluff too much because then you can start going down a rabbit hole. And I think that there's such an interesting and fascinating part about it because not a single one is going to be the same. You're not going to have the exact same assessors probably in a group together. And if you're going to go through it multiple times, like we will go through it multiple times with our different clients as an MSP. We're going to be going through different clients. So that's even going to be different, so there's always going to be different pieces to it. But the one thing that is for sure is you need to have evidence to prove what you're talking about is correct. And you need to know what you're talking about, and that's why I also think is so scary about companies doing this themselves without somebody to help, just because you really got to have a certified CMMC professional on staff or a contractor that can do this with you, because I just couldn't imagine somebody that's like not technical, being able to speak to these properly. They would have to get pulled in. So just all these layers, all these things that are just really, really fascinating about it. But yeah, you can put it all together with a script, right?
Well, I think to double down more about what you're talking about, Nathan, to kind of give more real life example to that, because I think that is a great question that should take some time to answer because it's super significant. I remember when I was coaching a flag football team and I was trying to get them ready, and it was one thing when we go to practice and everything went smooth and we did it. But when it was game time, like the ref's like, okay, get the play in. Have you done your substitution yet? Bit on the delay of game. We're moving you back. Like, there's a certain cadence and process to the game when it's game time, and you've got to know it and you've got to be ready for it and you got to keep up with it. And if you don't, it does not go well. And the audit is the same way in that kind of assessment tango. The auditor is going to be like, all right, 311, we're going to deal with limiting system access to authorized users as processes acting on behalf of authorized users. Let's talk about alpha. Authorized users identified. Okay, how do you do that? I looked at your system security plan, and it says that you authorize users and you add them to Active Directory. Can you talk to me a little bit more about what that means? And they're like, well, yeah, the HR department tells me that they're supposed to come in here and then I add them. Bravo says the process is acting on behalf of those users. How do you identify that those users are associated with the people that you do? Oh, well, they log in as their account. Okay, I'm starting to do that. But you're authorizing the users. How did you authorize them in the first place? Well, the HR told me. Well, but Like, how do you know the users that are in the system are the users that are authorized? Well, it's the users in my Active Directory. No, a threat actor could add that account in there. Like what's the inventory that I can go through to compare the accounts that have access for those? And they're like, what? And you're like, no, not what. Like, there needs to be like a form, like a list of forms of people that have all filled it out, or there needs to be, an RBAC database that I can go back and say, all these people filled the forms out and they're approved. And now I look to Active Directory and they match. They're right. Okay, we're good. They've been authorized. And if you don't understand the controls and you're not ready to defend that posture with the auditor, and you just put some information like the company will authorize the user to do that, you're just making a promise. You haven't told me how you exactly do it in your system security plan. You haven't written your authorization process. They fill out this form. It's called this, and we save it in this folder. And this role person is the one that authorizes it. And then the IT department, which is separate than the ones that authorize, are the ones that that create the accounts and have the permissions and the rights to do it. Now you're talking. Now they start to understand that. And so when the auditor goes to look at it, what we did is we went through and we self-assessed ourselves, and we wrote kind of answers to each determination statement. So in 311, there's Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, Echo, Foxtrot, A, B, C, D, E, F. So if you look up the document 800-171 Alpha, the A, that 800-171 Alpha document has all of those Alpha, Bravo, Charlie. They're all broken out. The auditor is going to ask a question about each one of those, because they're required
each assessment objective.
Each one of those they're going to look at, and they're going to want to know the answer to it. And they're going to want to be able to do the 3 assessment methodologies. Kaleigh, you've been studying that. Do you know what the 3 assessment methodologies are?
I do.
I say that only jokingly because I forgot one on one of the podcasts, and I got a lot of crap about it, rightfully so, because I'm a CCP and I should know that by heart.
Okay. Is test is one.
Yes.
Is analyze another?
Examine, but analyze. Yeah, we'll do that.
Verify. No.
Nah, it's a lot about talking.
Inform.
Interview.
Okay,
That was one I forgot too. But there's 3 assessment methods that the auditor is going to take you on. Test, examine, interview. So they're gonna look at how that, and they need to at least have 1, if not 2, to feel like each of those assessment objectives have been met. And so when we did our self-assessment, we went through and we wrote our response that we're going to say once they ask about Alpha, this is our response, and we wrote it out. And then said, okay, now how are we going to prove it? So we wrote like a test process about, this is what I'm going to say, and I'm going to show this. Mm-hmm. It might be I'm going to show a document. It might be I'm going to show the folder where the forms are. Here's a screenshot of it if you want to see it. It might be I'm going to go to this actual location, because remember, they're waiting. Mm-hmm. So you better know where the frick Active Directory users and groups, like you got to know where to get to it, because if you're doing it in Intra, they just changed it 2 weeks ago, right? So you're like, dadgummit, like they've compressed it in these other things now, and where's it at? And like, you want to do quick. You want to get there and get it quick, because the longer they're asking questions, the better chance they're going to find something they don't like. So you want to answer the question. The sooner they can accept it and move on, the better for you. It's a very long answer to you.
All these things you're talking about, I've been a nerd for 20 years, and I've managed nerds for 20 years. We're not good at this stuff, right? Like you were talking about how like your POAM didn't match all the steps you took to get there. And I've done a lot of Active Directory build outs, and guess what you did? You had a few checklists, but a lot of it was by heart. You knew exactly where to click and where to go. Like, that's how we build things. And then we forgot to add this user to the group. Okay, let me fix that. Okay, I got to go check this box. And like, oh, I always forget to check that box. And you go back, and like, that's
problem solving.
We're problem solvers. We're builders. We're creative. We're a different kind of creative person. We're just building these things. I always said I'm just playing with Legos, but they're just digital Legos instead of, plastic Legos.
That's right. Yeah.
And so all the stuff you're talking about is really hard, because it takes attention to detail, which is the entire point, right? Is, well, if you build it off of the back of your, out of the stuff in your memory every time, you're going to end up in a spot where you didn't build it right once, and you're going to miss the detail. And this is to catch those details. But that's you almost have to have the right people involved to get here. is what I'm hearing too.
For sure. And don't, one of the misconceptions I had when I went to go through the audit, that I assumed the auditors would be omnipotent, that they would have the same level of knowledge about the environment that I have.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that they're going to be like, how did you do intra again? You didn't use the right group nesting on that. Boy, I get, you're an idiot. What the heck were you thinking? Like, they're not, what they're there to assess is the system that you have built, mainly around your documentation, your policies and process and procedures. And then they want to validate it in the actual system that it's functioning as designed. They don't want to see your CUI. They definitely don't want to see that. They're not exporting that type of data. They're not putting their hands on the keyboard and here, get out of the way. I'm going to go check and look. They are not allowed to do that. They can only peer in based on what you're doing and the stuff that you're showing them. So to some extent, if you were a massive liar, you could create some house of cards. And if you happen to just say the right things and then the right, you could technically kind of create something that is not really very necessarily real, but
it's so much work for nothing.
It's a lot of work to do it the wrong way. You really need to do it the right way.
That's exactly how I feel about people who cheat on tests sometimes.
Yeah, you're like, come on, man, seriously. But the thing about that is if you've created the system in such a way that they can understand it and they realize that you've got the stop gaps to catch mistakes, you might have 150 user accounts in your system. Is the auditor going to sit here and look at your RBAC database and compare all 150? No, probably not. They might look at a sampling of one or two of them to see if they match. They might do a random checking of stuff, but they're not going to sit here and go, I'm going to look at every device in your inventory, every software piece in your inventory, and, looking for the problems. No, what you're doing at that point is you're just an investigator looking for a problem. Mm-hmm. The auditor is really there to find that you have a cohesive system that has the appropriate stop gaps to catch it when you're human.
Right.
Because if they look hard enough, they'll find the humanity in the system and fail you. That's not what they're trying to do. They're wanting to find that you've got a system that is robust enough to catch that human factor over time, and it will function and work correctly.
Yeah.
That's all. That's why they only want to go as far as they need to, because they're wanting to determine. But if they look at the system and they start sniffing around, they're like, this is not a very robust system. It is like a house of cards. Your system expectations are very poor as far as in, you're placing too much onus on manual processes on these things over here. You haven't even appropriately fleshed out your procedures. So there's no way I have any idea how you're going to do it correctly. Then they're going to get very interested and they're going to start very much digging.
I think that too, Nathan, you brought up a great point, though, that I do want to emphasize is at CMMC can't just be done by the IT guy, because documentation is not necessarily the best quality of an IT guy, So it's definitely like, there are companies that have one IT guy, they hired an intern, whatever, and they are like, you're tasked with this, the CMMC thing, and it's kind of insane to request of somebody, especially somebody who specializes in IT. Because I get that, a lot of these things that Bobby has said has to do with building. And like you said, you're good with Legos and you can build those, but the documentation has to be exact as well. And so there's two sides of the coin, and you have to be good at both of them. Can't just be good at one,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, it sounds a lot like an interview with a large customer when we've done a lot of work in the mid-market over my career. So you're working with a 500,000 person company. They've got some smart people in IT. And I always have felt that there's a moment in some of those initial interactions where you either earn their respect or you don't. And it often has very little to do with the content of what you're talking about. It's the questions you ask and the knowledge you show. When they tell you about something and you ask them a question, they go, oh, you understand what I'm trying to solve. Like your response tells them that you're thinking into what they're talking about with understanding of the context, right? It's not just, hey, I'm dealing with everything you put on the paper and I'm a salesperson. We all, the sales guy, like, well, I've got the high level acronyms memorized and I know what we sell. There was always a moment with those bigger companies of like, earning their respect of like, okay, I can work with you. And it sounds like there's some of that with these guys of,
For sure.
they're asking you questions partially just to hear that in your response, you're demonstrating a thorough knowledge of the goal, right? Of where you're going.
Yeah, well, you want to be, everybody wants to be respected. And you can't disrespect an auditor any faster than not being appropriately prepared when they show up.
So true.
If you're like, they're like, all right, 311 Alpha, go. And you're like, what do you mean go? Like, what do you want to ask me? And you're like, well, tell me your stance on it. Well, read my system security plan. That's what my stance is. And they're like, did you just say that? That is not going to go well. Like, you've got to be prepared and know what they need. Like you're saying, Nathan, they appreciate that when you've taken the time to make their job as easy as possible so that they can make sure, because they keep in mind, think about this for a second. For those of you who may not know, so for us, like we hired a C3PO, we paid them for that. So we hired the company that is going to audit us and potentially fail us if we didn't do it right. So we paid a good amount of money for that company to come in and audit us. And so they understand that they charged you money. So they want you to pass if they can help it. So you help them help you by being ready and providing that information. And second off, that's really, really important is that you've got to understand what it is that they're looking for, know what they're doing, and be prepared to help them get there as quick as possible. Because if they've got to spend any more time asking you more questions, it might drag the audit on, and they bid for this. And it's just like you're doing a project where you're doing a server installation. You don't freaking want it to take twice as long as you thought it was going to be because you're going to lose your butt, right? So they're a company too. They need to make money. So they don't want to take the audit any longer than they have to. So what they'll do is they'll just fail you. They're not going to dig any further. They'll just say not met because they've got a limited amount of time they can hang out there. Yeah. So it's very interesting.
Wild. Well, it's exciting and it's good news. I think it'll be fun to hear, what you learn as you do multiple now. Cause I'm sure you took a long list of notes on how you're going to do it differently with your next, your first customer one.
Yeah. One of the things, a good buddy of mine, Andy Sauer from Sentinel Blue, deeply respect that guy. We're competitors. If I'm Rocky and I'm shadow boxing like him and some of the other guys that I know, like that's the people I see in the mirror that I'm shadow boxing because they're my competitors, but they're also my friends, So like, you respect them. And what he said is he congratulated when we posted ours because I did for him as well too. But he's like, now we're ready to get to work. And what he didn't exactly explain it, but I knew what he meant because he knows that's what I'm thinking the same way. Like literally us getting our level 2 is like, we're in the starting blocks now. Now we're ready to go. It's time for us to get our clients getting across that. And then how do you do that at scale? That is a much harder mountain to climb for us to try to get done. And that is the challenge that any MSP that's going to get into this space is going to do. And this is why I think there isn't going to be a lot of MSPs that are going to do this, is because it's exceedingly difficult to do that. And if you think about the 40,000+ MSPs that are in the industry, there is a small percentage of them that operate at a high OMI level or operational maturity, however you want to call it. But when you have to operate at a CMMC level, it takes it beyond that. It is so far beyond that because of it's more than just you and your team. You've got to think about what your clients are going to need and try to anticipate it. You've got to have processes in place when it's time for their clients' audit. Are you ready to sit down with them and help prepare them like almost in a trial for what they're going to say and what they're not going to say? Are you ready to have that conversation? It's not all about you. It's about them and how you're going to help them pass.
Sit in that room, but they're the ones being audited. So you're the technical expert, but you have to have somebody at the customer that owns this content well enough.
Yeah. Their HR person's got to talk.
Yeah.
I'm not hiring. I'm not firing. They are. I'm technically implementing it, but they're going to have to talk about that. You can only but you can only intercede in their behalf so much. At certain points, the client's going to have to talk. Now, we did a webinar with ExoStar, and we shared a chart that broke down what the percentage of controls that we own completely. I think it was 116, I think something like that, controls that we fully own of the 320. And I think it was like 200 was shared between us and the client.
Yep, that's correct.
And then there were 4 that they own solely themselves. So of the 200, at some point they're going to talk, possibly, and at some point we're going to talk. Now, it might be that, and part of it, they just said, yes, we accepted Axiom's policies. And then we're like, yeah, they did. And that's the extent of what their involvement is.
Sure.
You have to have that division of duties of knowing when the client is going to talk. And you have to, like a deposition, have prepared them for that conversation.
Yeah.
Like, what kind of MSP would just throw their client to the wolves like that? That's crazy talk. As well as they have to have picked out specific C3POs they know they have a best chance of passing because they understand the system of what's going on. There's no way in heck. I remember I was sitting in a peer group and this large company, like, I don't know how large, they're a lot larger than me. And they were like, oh yeah, the company, they've got to really pay attention to the C3PO they pick. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't know what you're talking about. There's no way in heck I would ever let the client pick the C3PO if I'm their MSP. I will give them the selection that they need to pick from, but I am not letting them pick because I don't know. If I don't know them, I will not pick them as a client.
Yeah.
I just wouldn't.
Yeah.
Because that organization is going to have a massive say on whether you're going to pass or not.
Yep.
Yeah. And I would guess there's value even of building relationships where if you're working with an auditor or a team that's worked with you before, they go, oh yeah, okay, I recognize this is Bobby's standard, Axiom standard process. Okay, I have questions because that based on what I've seen previously, show me this, right? But that you're not having to learn it fresh every time,
Exactly.
100%.
Yeah.
Wild stuff. Well, you made it to, I don't know, is this like Lord of the Rings? You guys are, you made it through the attack of the orcs and now you guys Frodo and Sam, and heading into the wilderness while the rest of the party goes to fight the battle at Helm's Deep.
Helm's Deep, yeah. We're on our way to Mordor. Good luck, guys.
Right.
Now, I'm not sure who Frodo is in this situation. Kaleigh, I'll let you pick. Samwise, maybe. I don't know.
Well, thanks for sharing your experience with us, and it's exciting, and we'll have to have you on in another few months to hear how things have changed, man.
Yeah.
Keep my fingers out of the CMMC stuff personally, but I'm fascinated by it. So,
well, you've been in the peer groups and the KPIs and the math of that, right? It's so fascinating. If you go to, what's the True Methods, or you're going to one of they have all these numbers of like, oh, the margin should be this and this should be this. Like nobody knows that math for CMMC.
No.
And that's all sort of being made up right now.
Yeah.
Well, even experience of like, okay, you have a CMMC process for my business. Yeah, we do. We're a partner that does that. Great. What's it going to cost? Oh, it's 10 grand or it's 100 grand or it's 500 grand or whatever it is. Okay. Have you had anybody pass that's been through your program? Like these are things that in a year get a lot clearer. It's like, well, these guys have a 85% pass rate and they know it's going to cost you, $172,000 and here's why, right? And whatever the variables are, that's a lot of stuff that's still going to be kind of fleshed out.
So let me ask you this, Nathan. Colt just joined in.
Colt just jumped in.
Yeah. Nice.
We're splitting podcast episodes. Cole's the next one, but you are welcome to join for a few minutes, Cole.
I could drop off here while you guys finish up.
Well, let me ask you this one thing that you may want to know. It's very interesting. What do you think the multiple of a standardly appropriately priced MSP cost, right? So let's say that, it's a 50-user system and they are appropriately priced and the general monthly recurring revenue for the client. They've got all of that. What do you think the multiple times it would be higher? Does that make sense what I'm asking?
Like the per seat cost per employee for like standard MSP versus a CMMC project?
Right, yeah. How much more do you think it would be multiple?
I mean, but what we were talking low 200s recently, I think, for a smaller business MSP, all in, everything, right? Your MSP support, your tools, all your IT, you're in the low 200s. I would think it'd be double if you're in the CMMC space, but that's just me.
Yeah, well, you're not too far off on the user count, but what ends up happening is other things increase it percentage wise too. So like your device costs, because you have to track the assets more. There's so much. Another thing that we did is we broke out our maintenance support for the container, right? So it's about 150-ish to 200 hours a year to support the container, whether they pick up the phone or not.
Right.
They haven't called me that Outlook doesn't open.
Procedure that has to be executed consistently.
Just that, right? So you got to charge for that. So we have a separate line item for the container costs.
Well,
then you have the per user seat that you want to do.
Well, then that's complicated because that 150 to 200 users is required, whether it's a 2-person enclave or a 500-person enclave, right? So it's very different price.
Yeah. So that's sort of where we settled. It's about 3 times what the cost would be. And I've talked with other MSPs that they sort of went at it some different directions, and the wheel seems to still be a wheel. Like it's usually around 3-ish, 2.5
effort
to 3.5. So it's anywhere between 2.5 and 3.5 times what they're used to paying for a well quoted standard MSP pricing. It's crazy.
Wow.
And some clients, like, they're not ready for that. And there's just like,
no, many aren't, yeah, it's going to be wild. Well, thanks again for joining us.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
To chat with you again, and congratulations. It's great news. You guys passed, and something definitely be proud about. That's really special. So
yeah, it's something we've been working for. We appreciate it. Thank you for having us on so much.
Yeah. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for joining us today on the IT Collab podcast, and we will catch you on the next one. Thank you.